See what I mean? So I've got another laptop here, and I'm going to read this chapter conclusion, the conclusion from this. And so this is a quote. I honestly believe it is better to know nothing than to know what ain't so. It's by a chap called Josh Billings. A lot of people think that they know that the author of this quote, or some version of it, was Mark Twain, real name Samuel Langhorne Clemens. But according to the website Quote Investigator, Mark Twain scholars can't find any persuasive evidence of this. And the original quote is probably by a writer known as Josh Billings, real name Henry Wheeler Shaw. This might lead us to ask a question. Are there things about project management that we know that just ain't so? If there were, how would we find out about them? The inspiration for this book is a quote from the researcher and computer scientist pioneer Alan Kay. Point of view is worth 80 IQ points. And in this book, we've talked about a bunch of different points of view. We've talked about streams, swamps, cars, and pirate ships. We've talked about escape, bets, commitments, some rather than all, and bad news for bosses. The Alan Kay quote suggests that one potential benefit of different points of view is that if you can look at things in the right way, you can be much cleverer about how you approach them. But there's a worrying thought built into this suggestion. It's the idea that if you look at things in the wrong way, you can make things worse, much worse. You could lose 80 IQ points. For most of us, losing 80 IQ points would make us very, very stupid. This is the reason that some projects fail even when they are staffed by clever people. Those clever people are looking at those projects in the wrong way, and looking at things in the wrong way makes them dumb. What's even scarier about these ways of seeing is that we almost never decide to see things in these unhelpful ways. Rather, these ways of seeing come to us unbidden and unconsciously. Yes, these ways of seeing are unhelpful, but they are also things that we know that just ain't so. In this book, mostly, I've been presenting ways of seeing that are helpful, that can make us smart rather than dumb in the way that we think about projects. But why do we need to do this? What's the need for me to describe each of these ways of seeing? I need to do this. I need to do this because these ways of seeing, streams, swamp, car, and so on, each of them has a shadow way of seeing. Each has a flip side. This is a way of seeing that if we're not careful can make us dumb. It's a way of seeing that just ain't so. When improvisers on a theatre stage agree to scrub the decks rather than pay attention to the pirate ship, it looks like they know that this is the right thing to do. Or when a team of developers notice an important problem and decide not to mention it to their bosses, they somehow know that this is the right thing to do. But in both of these examples, this is something they know that just ain't so. In improvised theatre, the best way to make the scene interesting would be to deal with the pirate ship on the horizon. Certainly that would be more interesting than ignoring it. And in software development, ignoring the problem isn't the best way to make the project possible, deliverable, or successful. The best way to do that would be to call out the problem so that it can be dealt with effectively. Similarly, people know that the things that are most important for a project to be successful are that it's on time and to budget. At least nearly all the people who attend my training courses seem to know this. And as we discussed in chapter Commit, the idea of on time and to budget is very closely connected to the idea of commitment and consistency. Most people seem to know that managing projects is about commitment and the commitment and consistency of keeping promises. They seem to know that even though it just ain't so. In the first 6 chapters of this book, the ways of seeing that I talk about are ways of seeing that can add to our IQ. They make us smarter. And for each of these, there's a shadow idea that could reduce it. And this shadow idea could make us dumb. Here's a statement of those shadow ideas that we've dealt with indirectly in the first 6 chapters of this book. Having the idea is enough. A project is free to do whatever it needs to do. Having the idea is enough is chapter Stream. A project is free to do whatever it needs to do, chapter Swamp. Once we've decided a destination, the project will drive itself, chapter Car. The project has no problems, chapter Ship. Nobody sees the project until it's finished, chapter Escape. The project is certain to succeed, chapter Bet. So here are 6 shadow ways of seeing. These are 6 things that people act as if they know. And these are 6 things which just ain't so. For each of them, I provided a different way of seeing, one that offers the opportunity to make us smarter. For each shadow statement, we can write a smarter statement, and these are the statements behind the ways of seeing that I've talked about. Having the idea isn't enough. We need to construct a stream that pulls all the valuable aspects of the idea together in a way that users want. A project isn't free to do whatever it needs to do. The project needs to take place in a complex and contested environment. For it to be successful, it will need to negotiate with many stakeholders and find a way to comply with many rules and regulations. Once we've decided a destination, the project won't drive itself. We'll need to pay attention to what's going on all the way through. Sometimes we'll need to slow down. Sometimes we'll need to speed up. Sometimes we'll change course. Sometimes we'll change the destination completely, chapter Car. The project will have problems, and the way to make the project a success is to tackle these problems. And what's more, people who point out these problems aren't bad people, chapter Ship. People need to see the project before it's finished, chapter Escape. The project is not certain to succeed, but it might be certain to fail. A project is a bet. Delivering a successful project is about trying to improve the odds of winning that bet. Do these helpful ways of seeing and these shadow ways of seeing have anything in common? I think they do. I think to understand both the shadow ways of seeing and the better ways of seeing that I've discussed in the first 6 chapters, we need to look at chapter All. The title of this book is Delivering the Impossible, and it's targeted at project managers. It offers the chance of being able to deliver projects even when they are impossible. It offers project managers the opportunity to be better at their jobs, even in situations that seem impossible. What does it feel like when you're good at your job? What's another way of describing being good at your job? How about saying this? You know what you're doing. In this final chapter, I can give you that. I can give In this final chapter, I can give you that. I can give you the opportunity to know what you're doing. But to tell you about it, for it to make sense, we need to revisit chapter All. In chapter All, we looked at 2 kinds of thinking: symmetrical thinking and asymmetrical thinking. Symmetrical thinking is about the idea that there can be an exact match between a description of the world and the world. This is like saying that the biscuit should and can be exactly as it is described on the tin. The opposite of symmetrical thinking is asymmetrical thinking. Asymmetrical thinking, I think I missed that. I'm just going to read that again because I think I missed that bit. Symmetrical thinking is about all, the same, and forever. Symmetrical thinking is also about the idea that there can be an exact match between a description of the world and the world. This is like saying that the biscuit should and can be exactly as it is described on the tin. The opposite of symmetrical thinking is asymmetrical thinking. Asymmetrical thinking is about some, different, and for a bit. This way of thinking also understands that there's a difference between the biscuit and the tin. They are made of different stuff. Asymmetrical thinking has a different way of thinking about the relationship between the biscuit and the tin. Asymmetrical thinking understands that the description of a biscuit and the biscuit can't be the same thing. Given the world we live in which nothing lasts forever, it's strange how difficult it is to express the opposite of forever, at least in English. Temporarily, for now, for the foreseeable future, none of them feel that satisfactory. And that lack of a satisfactory feeling points to a significant difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical ways of seeing. Symmetrical ways of seeing, in general, all, same, forever, and exact match, are immediately appealing because they are the way our unconscious minds work. This is the insight that we can take from Ignacio Matblanco, the author who gives the idea for this separation between symmetrical thinking and asymmetrical thinking. Another way of thinking about this is that symmetrical ways of thinking are made of mind stuff. The unconscious mind likes same and forever. The unconscious mind wants an exact match. I've just spotted a spelling mistake. The unconscious mind wants an exact match between the biscuit tin and the biscuit. The unconscious mind doesn't notice the difference between descriptions of biscuits and actual biscuits. It doesn't notice that they're made of different stuff. Maybe Matblanco does explain somewhere in his writings exactly why our unconscious mind accepts symmetrical thinking and expects an exact match between thoughts, words, and reality. But for us, really, all we need to know for the purposes of this book is that this idea that we unconsciously favor thinking in terms of same, all, forever, and exact match has explanatory power, and I think it does. Thinking about things in terms of all, same, forever, and exact match, and contrasting them with thinking of some, different, for a bit, and inexact match helps us know what we're doing. Because now that we've revisited this distinction between symmetrical ways of thinking, we can look again at some of the ways of seeing that we've talked about in this book, and we can do that side by side with their shadow ways of seeing. These are the things we know that just ain't so. Having the idea is enough contains the idea that everything, all the things, needed to realize the idea are contained in the idea. It also contains in it the implication that what is built can be exactly the same as the idea. There's also another kind of symmetrical thinking that we see on projects. Writing it down or saying it out loud seems crazy, so I wouldn't be tempted to say it if it weren't for the fact that so many people who are involved in projects seem to behave as this were true. Once the idea exists, the reality also exists. This also explains why the shadow idea of Chapter Swamp is that there will be no environmental obstacles. The project will be able to do all the things that need to be done to bring itself into existence, because in some sense it already exists. And because it already exists, it won't need to be supervised. It won't need to be controlled. There will be no need for any transparency or any inspection to see how it is going. There won't need to be any changes. No one needs to drive the car. And here we start to see the second kind of symmetry that runs through all of the shadow statements. This is the idea that not only will all of the parts of the project be implemented without encountering any problems or any environmental resistance, but also the implementation will be exactly the same as the original idea. Everything exactly the same as described in the original idea. This is starting to sound a lot like commitment and consistency. And we're ready now to revisit Chapter Commit, because we can see how the ideas in Chapter All explain the powerful attraction of commitment and consistency. In Chapter Commit, I deal head-on with the shadow way of seeing. This is for a couple of reasons. The first is that for many people, project management is all about being on time and to budget. On time and to budget is about commitment and consistency. So for many, many people, So for many, many people, commitment and consistency is precisely what they think project management is. But this is something that they know that just ain't so. Well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. We have to treat commitment and consistency a little differently from the other ways of seeing that we've discussed in the earlier chapters. That's because the useful way of seeing, the way of seeing that can make us smart, isn't simply the opposite of commitment and consistency. The successful way of seeing, the alternative way of seeing, like the biscuit in comparison to the biscuit tin, is made of different stuff. But we've had indications of this different stuff from what we've seen in other chapters. And then chapter all pretty much made this clear. In chapter stream, I explained that the value of the stream for this new product would have to be not just assembled from existing parts, but created, designed, and evolved. And I suggested that this was best done by putting it in contact with end users, by connecting to pull. What we came to understand in this chapter is that the value stream that we construct is a new thing, and it's a different kind of thing from the value stream that created, funded, and sustained the idea. It has to work in the world of users, not the world of ideas. It's made of different kinds of stuff. In the following chapter, Chapter Swamp, the ultimate answer to what needs to be done to deliver a project in a complex landscape is something similar. Figuring out what kind of project can work in this complex environment of obstacles, regulation, and ownership is a matter of creation, design, evolution, and connection to pull. Very likely this won't be exactly the same as the initial idea or any documentation of the original idea. This is why I'm saying that the way of seeing that I advocate in chapter Commit is more complicated than we might initially think. Commitment and consistency isn't itself, commitment and consistency in itself isn't a bad thing. But as Ralph Waldo Emerson explained, there are dangers in foolish consistency. But not all commitment and consistency is foolish. We can and should be committed to the empirical process. We should commit to fostering transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Consistently applying these ideas and the other good ways of seeing that I talk about in the first 6 chapters is being committed to using the ways of seeing that make us smart. Finding what steps will come together to create value for the users and how they work in every given project space, chapter stream, chapter swap, is inconsistent and non-committal compared to the idea, but it's consistent with the idea of delivering value for the users and for the organization. Negotiating the complex environment of a project is like driving a car, chapter car. We need to be committed and consistent in dealing with the terrain in front of us and the traffic around us. We need to be consistent and committed to looking through the windscreen. And that necessarily means being non-committal and inconsistent with any initial plans about how fast we are going or what route we're going to take. But that doesn't mean that something good can't happen. The result of the efforts of user research, organizational research, and feedback from users about working software can be something enormously valuable. Probably, very probably, it won't be any consistent reflection of any initial commitment that was made on the project. So, with the help of the idea of symmetry and asymmetry, we can tell a story of what it is that project managers are doing. They're doing something in some time. What they are doing, what's delivered, won't be a perfect match with what has been described and possibly committed to. And that's for several reasons. First of all, it will be some of what's discussed rather than all. Secondly, it won't be made of the same stuff as what was initially described. The other part of this is persuading. Right. Sorry, I'm editing on the fly here. The other part of this is persuading your bosses to think asymmetrically, coming up with a way to get them to acknowledge the problems, the pirate ships, and the swamp things that emerge in the course of your project. There's a chapter that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the final chapter, chapter Boss. The poet John Keats was dead from consumption by the age of 26, but in his tragically short life, he managed to write some of the most beautiful poems in the English language. In a letter to his brother, he gave a glimpse of his approach to creativity. Keats talks about the importance for creativity of something that he called negative capability. He explained this as being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. We're not poets, so we do have to do a little bit of reaching after fact and reason. But do we need to be irritable about it? And does that mean that we can't be comfortable about uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts? People thinking that project management is all about consistency, that people think that project management is all about consistency. The need for commitment and consistency is one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. Because of this, the urge for commitment and consistency is often misused as a way of manipulating people. And because of that, many of the commitments that software development teams end up making are either foolish commitments or not really commitments at all. If you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. What's a successful project? It's an ongoing negotiation between the people who own and or fund the project and the people who will use the project. It's an agreement to deliver something that's possible, useful, and valuable. The solution to this is something in some time. This seems much less attractive than everything immediately. Working software over detailed documentation is the same as saying the biscuit, not the tin. There's a final thing that people don't know that ain't so. If you write a book about project management, you should know all the answers. I really never said I know all the answers. What I have said is that there are some ways of seeing that are more helpful than others. And I've shown you some of these better ways of seeing. In this final chapter, we've discussed why these are better ways of seeing than the shadow ways of seeing that are far more common. User research, working software, and inspection and adaptation are practices that will help you see things from the right point of view. So earlier in this chapter, I did say that I could explain what we're doing when we're doing project management. And of course, because commitment and consistency is such a powerful urge, I feel the need to keep my word. But I don't think that this is too hard now. I think we have the bits that we need to assemble an explanation that delivers value. And here are the bits. Shadow ways of seeing things that we know that ain't so. Some and all, the unconscious mind's tendency to prefer all, same, forever, and exactly what it says on the tin. And our explanation of why that is in terms of stuff, dream stuff and real stuff. Okay, so here goes. What are we doing when we do project management? We do something over a certain space of time that has some value to somebody. This thing bears some relation to the description on the tin, but is fundamentally different because it's made of different stuff. And we keep doing this, despite the clamour from almost everybody and also from our own minds for the comfort of all, same, forever, and exactly what it says on the tin. That's what we're doing. And if you're the boss, you need to know that's what you're doing. Or rather, you need to know what you're doing. Okay. Terrible sentence. And if you're the boss, you need to know what you're doing. Or rather, you need to know what you're doing, but you need to also know what you've already done. By kicking off a project, you brought yourself a lot of uncertainty, mysteries, and doubts. Knowing everything. So, note, I think. Minto argument. Obvious statement. There are some ways of seeing that make us smarter. Complication. These aren't the way that we tend to see projects. Sophistication. This is because our unconscious mind likes ways of seeing that are of a certain form, all same, forever, and exact match. So to use the ways of seeing that make us smarter and to know what we are doing, we need to consciously inject some different, in time, and inexact match into our projects. Being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts. Okay, so it clearly tails off towards the end there. But that's been useful for me. I'm going to stop there. If you do look at this, thanks very much. And if you're very nice, I'll tell you what's written on my t-shirt.